Hey everyone, we're here in beautiful Kona, Hawaii, and we got the 2009 Ford Ironman World Championship a couple days away, but it's also 20 years since the greatest Ironman race of all time. And with me, the two legends of Ironman, Mark Allen and Dave Scott, who are the principals, and seriously, a race that no one has captured, no one has come close to duplicating here on the Kona coast. First of all, guys, for you, Dave, you went into that race as the six-time champion, and Mark Allen had been the guy who'd been basically knocking at the doorstep for a number of those years. What were your thoughts going into that race?
Well, it's 20 years ago, Bob. I mean, they're not.
You remember every second of it.
They're not quite as acute as they were 20 years ago. No, I do remember. Mark and I raced a couple times, and we had I felt a great race. Mark had an epic race in the Gold Coast, and I really thought, if Mark was on his game as he had been in these other races, that he'd be a formidable foe in that race. And I was still confident that if we were together on the bike,
right,
a big if, that I would still have a great marathon in the end.
So, Mark, you'd had so much success everywhere else in the world. You'd won, Nice 10 times. You'd won everything else except for this race. What did you do differently going into '89? Especially after you did this disappointed in '88. He wasn't there in '88. You have flat problems, and now you're coming back to '89. You have to wonder if you're cursed on this island, and you have to wonder if you could ever beat this guy.
I really didn't know if I could. Like you said, Dave and I had some actually amazing races, different places around the world at different distances, and I was pretty successful at those. But here it was 0 for 6, and I just didn't know if I had what it would take. I had been able to stay with Dave for 3/4 of the race, but like they say, it's not the person that leads longest who wins. It's the one who comes across the finish line in first place. And so in '89, I was 7 years into attempting to try and be one of the best or the best here in Hawaii, and I hadn't been able to do it. My other competitors, my family, the press, everybody was saying, go to the other races where you have a little better chance of success.
It would have been a good idea.
I think it would have been a great idea.
This close to saying, you guys are right. It's too hot, it's too windy, Dave is too strong, and I couldn't see myself winning unless he had a bad race. But as we all know, Dave Scott does not have bad Ironmans here in Kona on the Big Island.
Never.
So my focus really in '89 was to just see if I could come here and have my best race, which meant not walking on the marathon, pacing it correctly, and to just see what that would be. And I didn't know if it was enough to beat Dave on his best day.
And so, Dave, as the day is unfolding, you guys come out of the water, you're right together, and Mark basically looks at you as the guy who's going to set the pace. I mean, why not have a tour guide who knows how to win the thing? Makes perfect sense to me. So, but you like to race from the front. You like to be the guy pushing the pace. Were you aware of where Mark was at throughout that entire bike ride?
I was aware of where Mark was on the swim.
Oh, okay.
So I knew that guy who kept clicking my feet back there was Mark.
I knew you liked that.
So yeah, really enjoyed that. So I'm back here.
Hey, I'm not going anywhere. I could be here all day.
That guy was. So, and I felt solid on the swim, but I had to sort of temper it, knowing that hey, it's early on. Let's wait till we get on the bike. And the bike, ironically, I felt pretty solid through the whole ride.
Yeah.
And, Wolfgang was ahead of us, and I kept thinking, I'd really like to catch him. At the same time, maybe Mark could drop off on the backside. And I never saw Mark. And in hindsight, when you have an opportunity to see your competitors, and I didn't like his strategy at the time, I said, well, that's not a good strategy. I'll be the leader.
Right.
And you just follow me. But I couldn't read his signals. You can't read body language on a bike. You can't see someone's breathing rate. If you're pressing at one of the climbs coming back from Javi and you notice that your competitor's kind of laboring a little bit or they're over-geared, I couldn't see that with Mark.
Right.
And so when we were on the Queen K coming back, I did feel a couple times that I felt as though, okay, I'm going to try to open up this gap on Mark, and that didn't happen. He was right there. I knew he was there even though I didn't see him, and so it came down to the run.
And I mean, Mark, obviously you wanted to make sure you were close to this guy. He was your tour guide. As you came closer to town and knowing you have to do this marathon, 2 years earlier you'd gotten away from him. and then he caught you later in the marathon, and the same thing had happened in '84. What were your thoughts going into the marathon? But back then, you'd also not done the long training days that you had done in New Zealand leading into this race. So what were your thoughts early in the run when obviously Dave went out pretty fast?
Well, my training in '89 was different. I spent a 6-week block of the springtime in New Zealand doing some miles that really were mind-boggling to me, and I saw that I could actually do some really amazing training if I simplified my life and just focused on it. So physically, I felt like I was in a better place, but you know, like Dave said, I shadowed him the entire bike ride. Even, you know, he would look back once in a while to kind of maybe get a glimpse.
Yeah.
And every time he looked back, I'd turn my head the other way. You know, I didn't want him to see my face.
Right.
And
Yeah.
part of it was just that strategy. If somebody doesn't know how you're feeling, they don't know what they need to do to break you, or if they can break you. So when we started the marathon, you know, I had no idea what kind of a race I was going to have or Dave was going to have. I just knew that when we took off through town, and that year, the way the marathon is, you had a 10K through town,
Right.
which means that you have roughly 6 miles where you have thousands of people pumping you up, cheering, giving you energy, and it can be a very false sense of feeling great because you're absorbing all that. When you get out of town, then you are hit with the reality of how you are feeling, how the other competitor is feeling. But Dave set a pace that was absolutely suicidal, and I knew it. But at that point, I didn't care. I thought, you know what? If I blow up, I'm going to go down with the best. And so
Exactly.
I was waiting.
You were waiting for him to blow up. And as you guys were running and you're out on the Queen Highway, all the excitement of town is gone, but there was still this cocoon of people around you out on the Queen Highway. As you guys were running along the Queen Highway, Mark had inside position to get aid, and you basically had to surge a little bit just to get aid at the stations. When you look back on it, do you look at that as a potential mistake during that race?
Well, I think you can single out, you know, a lot of different moments where
Yeah.
I think, well, I coulda.
Yeah.
But, you know, you try to monitor your energy
Yeah.
and keep it as even as you can. And I remember as we were along Lee Drive here on that 10K section, and the pace was fast, I did have the inside pull, and Mark came in on the inside, and I just thought, you know, we should probably just share that because it is easier to get a
Sure.
you know, an easy pass if you're on that inside.
Right.
And so we maintained that position, and I just realized, you know, for me to get a couple glasses of fluid replacement drink, I had to drop back, and I, you know, would kind of surge back up each time, and I didn't really think twice about it. But I did recognize it when I felt the gun went off, and that was at 16 miles. We used to run beyond the airport, so we had 10 miles basically to come back in. And I said, when we come around this turn, I'm going to be on the inside. And whether Mark realized it or not, he moved on the inside. I said, well, that's okay. I'll just keep doing what I'm doing.
Right.
So,
Yeah.
you know, it played out, but really at that 16-mile mark, besides the opening 6 miles, I felt like, okay, now we're really going to race, and that last 10 miles is going to be the decider.
So Mark, 10 miles to go. Your dream is to win this race. Your legacy as a triathlete needs one more item, and it's to win this race. That last 10 miles, what was going through your mind in terms of, did you have an idea of where you wanted to make a move?
well, at that point, I had shifted into, you know, kind of a very different mindset and reality. I had I had made a connection with an Indian tradition from Mexico that enables you to really draw strength from the land where you're at. And I was seeing the Big Island as a paradise and not as a hell like I had the other years. And I was really, at that point, grateful to just be racing with the best guy in the sport. I mean, we were side by side. We're on the Queen K Highway. That we have the entire road to ourselves, and we keep bumping into each other because neither of us wanted to give the other one an inch.
Right.
And like Dave said, you know, when we made the turn with 10 miles to go, it felt like the race started. The gun went off, and now this is it. We were on a pace that was going to set a world's record. Dave was either going to win his 7th Ironman or potentially me my first. And it just got faster and faster and faster. And I could feel that this guy next to me, there was nothing I could do to intimidate him. There was no surge or ploy that I could do that would break him mentally. I had to outrace him, and that was an incredibly daunting thought. And to finally answer your question, I had in the back of my mind that if somehow we were together the entire run, that on the last long uphill before we dropped back down into town, that would be where I would try to make a break.
Right.
And I had seen that Dave was actually, in my sense anyway, was that he was actually getting a little slower on the uphills. So to play cat and mouse, when we would go on the uprises, I would actually drop behind him a few paces to make him think, well, maybe he wasn't slowing down, or that maybe he was weaker. You're doing anything you can
Right.
to give yourself
An
that
edge.
little ounce
Absolutely.
of confidence,
Yeah.
in an impossible situation like that. And, the move did come at that final aid station before we launched up the final last uphill. Dave actually did get the inside track on that aid station, and he kind of reached around to get, some sustenance, and something inside me just said, go. And it was like I was shot out of a cannon, and right as I was going to reach to get my final moment of nourishment, I took off. I didn't get water. I didn't get any fluid replacement drink, anything. And I thought that may be suicide, but it just seemed right. And I took off, and literally in that moment where Dave reached, he had to look back, a gap began to open up, and that was the beginning of the moment for me.
And for you, Dave, you were planning to make the move at the top of the hill.
Yeah, I'd always felt, despite my unsightly running form, that I could run well on the downhill.
Yeah.
And I've never really felt, what people describe, that huge discomfort in your legs. Obviously, I was very fatigued in the race, knowing we had 2 miles left. Mark was right there. One of us has to do something. And I had thought, before the race had begun, that if we were together on the run, if we were actually going to be together, that I would break Mark on that last downhill. And it's 3/4 of a mile and a pretty good slope, and it is, really can throttle your legs at the end. And I just felt as though, I'd glide up to the top, we'd be together, and then I would make that distinctive move. But by then, when Mark made that move, at the aid station, it took me, prior to that, almost a mile, I don't know if Mark sensed this, to slowly inch up. And I said I need to conserve my energy because, soon I'm going to be on this downhill and I'm going to break Mark. So I said, I'll just bide my time and slowly close that gap, reach the next aid station, and that's when Mark made his move. And each step he would pick up another 6-8 inches.
So Mark, coming down that final stretch, Elite Drive, this has been a goal for you for 7 years to finally win that race, to really cement your legacy as one of the greatest triathletes in history. What were your thoughts coming down Elite Drive?
It was that feeling of absolute ecstasy and a feeling like, finally, I have done it. You go from having the biggest smile on your face to having tears coming down. But that one win wasn't necessarily a legacy builder. It was just a great moment for Dave and I. To have pushed each other to that extreme. He broke his record by almost 15 minutes or something. 18 minutes. That's a big chunk of time.
Yeah.
And to be a part of that was, such an honor. And for me personally, it was a big moment, and it really took me all year to really feel like I absorbed how amazing that race was in the year that followed.
Yeah. And you guys went a lot of years with really not talking amongst each other about that race. I mean, obviously idiots like me talk about it all the time, but were there ever any questions you had for him about his strategy that day?
Yeah, I mean, I think new things come out every time we sit down and talk about it. That the moments where Mark's describing where I was seemingly falling back a little bit on the hills, and that was my strategy to drop back, and the moment that I was trying to break away. Yeah, I wanted to get into his head to think, what were you actually thinking during that race? How did you feel physically? Did you have moments, as we all do, where you think, oh my gosh, I don't think I can hang on? Well, I had moments on the bike where I said, gee, I hope Mark doesn't have a big surge right now because I feel flat. And there were sections, certainly on the run, where I felt, extremely fatigued, and I thought, I'm not as easy or as fluid as I'd like to be. I hope Mark is feeling the same. Well, your physiology doesn't match up perfectly like that. And mentally, you go through those flat periods where you want to try to resurrect that very strong feeling.
So for you, you've, at that point, because I know you don't race with a watch, I don't know how aware you were, how how fast the two of you were going. But you're coming down a lead drive. Obviously, you want to win. You knew it was a great race. You had to be disappointed. But at the same time, how long did it take you to sort of savor the fact that this was probably the greatest race in triathlon history?
Well, I think like Mark, you know, when you're at the moment and you're racing, and we had a kind of a big envelope, this big entourage that was following us in. I think people recognize that, you know, during that race, you know, here it is. It was built as the, you know, Mark and Dave show, and this is going to be the year. Well, the irony is that it turned out to be, you know, a great race. And when I finished that race, I mean, I think just a huge wave of disappointment. I mean, we were that close.
Right.
Mark beat me on a fabulous day. I couldn't have gone any harder.
Right.
You know, I did what I could do, and he beat me on that day. So, you know, to recognize that and realize, yeah, I wasn't even thinking I could have won 7. It was really just about that day of bringing out my best effort. And oh my gosh, you know, some guy beat me on that day. So it didn't really hit until, you know, I'd say months later.
I mean, the cool thing is to beat the best guy on his best ever day. And to both be involved with something that 20 years later we're still talking about because it was such a legendary day. And not just in triathlon, but in all of endurance sports. Thanks, guys, for taking some time.
Welcome.
Our pleasure.
All right. You know, it's not often you have an opportunity to talk to two of the legends of the sport of triathlon about the greatest day in Ironman history. It was called IronWar. It was 20 years ago this week. And Dave Scott and Mark Allen changed the face of triathlon forever.